My sister stood at the podium in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, raised her champagne flute, and proudly announced herself as the new CEO of the bakery chain I spent my entire youth building. My parents applauded from the front row, ignoring the fact that she had just stolen my corporate seal and forged my signature to transfer the brand into her name. I stood near the exit doors, shoved aside at my own company anniversary, watching them toast to an empire I baked from scratch. What they did not know was that I had already frozen the commercial operating accounts and held the encrypted IP login logs proving her wire fraud. They assumed I was an ignorant baker who could not navigate a server interface. By stealing my company on paper, my sister did not secure her future. She signed her own federal indictment and walked directly into the trap I set. My name is Chloe. I am 35 years old, and I am the sole legal founder of Chloe's Crust. Before I continue this story, drop a comment with your age, your local time, and where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe to Sweet Life Drama if you have ever had your blood relatives exploit your hard work to bail out a golden child. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how I dismantled their illusion right in front of their corporate partners. Now let me take you into the reality of that night. The applause echoing off the ballroom walls felt like physical blows. Olivia, 38 years old with a track record of 3 bankrupt startups, smiled for the hired photographer. She wore a designer silk dress purchased with my corporate credit card. My father, clapping the loudest, had spent the last decade telling me a bakery was a cute hobby, refusing to acknowledge the storefronts I opened across the tri-state area. Tonight he looked at my sister like she was a visionary. I did not run to the stage. I did not scream into the microphone. Anger requires energy I refuse to give them. I turned on my heel, walked out of the double doors, and stepped into the freezing November parking lot. The cold air hit my face, sharpening my focus. I sat in the driver's seat of my SUV and opened my tablet. An automated email from my human resources software illuminated the dark cabin. My administrator password had been changed. 2 minutes later, a notification from Chase Bank flashed across the screen. Check signing authority had been transferred to a new managing member, Olivia. She had submitted a fraudulent LLC operating agreement to the state registry using an electronic signature platform. She thought my expertise ended at measuring flour and tempering butter. She failed to realize I hired a cybersecurity firm 2 years ago to build a dual authentication server for my entire point-of-sale network. Every keystroke, every login, every IP address was tracked and archived. The phone in my console vibrated. It was a text from Marcus, Olivia's husband. Marcus was a sharp-suited finance director who made his living moving other people's money. He viewed manual labor not just as beneath him, but as an intellectual failure. For years, he sat at our Thanksgiving table, drinking imported wine, openly joking to my parents that my apron was a tragic waste of a good GPA, before offering his unsolicited, condescending advice on my profit margins. Now, he was acting as the architect behind my sister's hostile takeover. The text message glowed on my dashboard. His message read, "Do not make a scene tonight, Chloe. Olivia has an MBA, and she knows how to scale. Take a 5% silent stake and enjoy the rest." He wanted me to bow out quietly, accepting a pathetic fraction of my own creation. I read his words twice. I did not type out a defense. I did not demand an explanation. I dropped the phone into the cup holder and started the engine. The next morning, the temperature dropped below freezing. I arrived at my flagship store in downtown Chicago. This was the location I built by hand, painting the trim, laying the subway tile, spending sleepless nights perfecting the croissant lamination process. I swiped my keycard. The scanner flashed red. A small digital display read, "Card invalid." I tried again, hitting the scanner over and over, the flashes looking like emergency lights. Same result. My breath came in short, ragged gasps in the cold air. I reached for the brass handle, grasping the cold metal with both hands and twisting, pushing as if I could tear it off the frame. I gripped so hard the edges dug deep into my skin. I was locked out of the building I held the deed to. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sharp buzz snapped me back from the edge of panic. It was a message from Sarah, my head pastry chef. She was inside, prepping the morning dough. Her text read, "Chloe, the register system is locked down and the vendor accounts are showing zero balances. What is happening?" I opened my mobile banking application, bypassing the standard login for the administrator portal. My stomach tightened, not from panic, but from the sheer audacity of what I saw on the screen. The ledger showed a pending outbound wire transfer. Exactly $150,000 was moving from the main operating fund to an external routing number. I recognized that routing number. It belonged to the wealth management firm where Marcus served as a senior director. They were not waiting for the ink to dry on their forged documents. They were looting the company treasury the very next day. That money was earmarked for holiday payroll and quarterly supplier invoices. Without it, the bakery chain would default on its obligations within a week. They expected me to panic. They expected me to call my parents, begging for intervention, pleading for my sister to return the funds. They relied on the family dynamic we had played out since childhood, where Olivia broke things and my parents forced me to clean up the mess. I leaned my shoulder against the frozen brick exterior of my bakery. I watched the streetlights reflect off the glass doors I could no longer open. I did not call my mother. I did not text my sister. I opened a new browser tab, found the contact number for a federal cybercrimes attorney I had met at a business seminar, and hit dial. I stood on the frosted pavement outside my flagship store and stared at the numbers glowing on my phone screen. The impulse to dial emergency services pulsed in my thumb. It is the natural human reflex when you realize you have been robbed. You call men with badges to come and fix it. I pressed 9 and then 1. My finger hovered over the final digit. I let the screen go dark. Local patrol officers deal with broken windows and stolen registers. If I called them here, they would ask for my keys. I would explain the digital lockout. Olivia would produce her newly filed state registry documents listing her as the managing member. The officers would flip through the pages, shift their weight, and deliver the standard line. They would tell me this appears to be a civil dispute and advise me to take it to civil court. Civil court meant injunctions. It meant mediators and settlement conferences dragging on for 18 months. It meant Olivia sitting in a leather chair offering me pennies on the dollar while Marcus funneled my daily revenue into his margin accounts to cover his bad market bets. I did not need a mediator. I needed a federal prosecutor. I slid my phone into my coat pocket, walked back to my SUV, and merged onto the interstate heading north. David ran his law practice out of a converted warehouse in a Fulton Market district. He did not wear suits. He did not have mahogany bookshelves. When I walked into his suite, the air conditioning was running, despite the November chill, working overtime to cool a rack of blinking servers stacked against the back wall. David sat behind a metal desk, typing lines of code across 3 separate monitors. We met 2 years ago at a risk management seminar. He spent 30 minutes dissecting how easily small businesses lose their intellectual property to internal threats. I hired him the next morning to build a dual authentication firewall for my point-of-sale network. He looked up from his screens when I dropped my encrypted backup drive on his desk. I did not offer small talk. I pulled up the bank notification and the state registry filing on my tablet and turned the screen toward him. My sister executed a fraudulent operating agreement at 2 a.m, I said. She forged my signature on a digital contract, submitted it to the state, and seized control of my bank routing numbers. I need the access logs. I need the digital fingerprints of the person who held the knife. David did not ask how I was feeling. He did not offer empty sympathies about family betrayal. He picked up the drive, plugged it into his terminal, and gestured to a plastic chair. Sit down. This requires time. For the next 6 hours, the warehouse remained quiet except for the clatter of David hitting his keyboard. I drank bitter coffee from a paper cup and watched lines of green text scroll down his primary monitor. I did not pace. I sat in the hard plastic chair and cataloged every piece of equipment in my 3 bakeries. 4 commercial deck ovens, 6 planetary mixers, 2 walk-in proofing retarders. I calculated the exact replacement value of the empire they had hijacked. I wanted the number burned into my mind. At 2 in the afternoon, David stopped typing. He leaned back and rubbed his eyes. He tapped a pen against the glass of his left monitor. "They were sloppy," he said. "Show me." I stood behind his shoulder. He highlighted a string of numbers. When an electronic signature is verified on a legal document, the platform records the exact Internet protocol address of the device executing the signature. Your sister did not use a public network. She did not cover her tracks. This IP address is static. It resolves to a premium residential fiber optic package registered to a specific property in Lake Forest. Marcus and Olivia owned a stone manor in Lake Forest. "Can you prove it came from their house?" I asked. David pressed a few more keys. "I can do better than that. I can tell you exactly what machine they used." Another block of text filled the screen. David pointed to the metadata embedded in the signature packet. When a high-level electronic signature is processed, the platform logs a comprehensive device fingerprint. David explained. It captures the operating system environment and the network routing. This specific fingerprint carries a configuration tag, wrapped in an enterprise-grade virtual private network tunnel protocol. I stared at the technical jargon. "Translate that for me." "Your sister did not use her personal laptop to steal your company," David said. "She used a machine equipped with institutional security software. This specific VPN handshake is exclusive to Tier 1 financial institutions. The device that forged your signature belongs to your brother-in-law's investment bank." The air in the room felt suddenly thin. Marcus worked as a senior director managing wealth portfolios for high net worth clients. His firm operated under strict federal oversight. He was bound by regulations enforced by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Using a bank-issued computer on a secure financial network to facilitate the theft of a commercial enterprise and intercept corporate funds was not a family dispute. It crossed state lines digitally. It utilized federal banking infrastructure. "They elevated this to wire fraud," I said. David nodded. "If we take this data to the right desk at the Department of Justice, your brother-in-law loses his licenses. He loses his career. He faces federal indictment." "Print every page," I said. "Seal it." While the laser printer in the corner began spitting out pages of server logs, my phone vibrated against the metal desk. It was an email from my apartment building concierge. The subject line read, "Urgent delivery, signature required." I opened the attached scan. It was a formal legal notice drafted by a strip mall law firm representing the new managing director of Chloe's Crust. A cease and desist order signed by Olivia. The language was sharp and patronizing. It formally terminated my employment as a baker. It revoked my access to all company properties. The final paragraph warned that if I stepped within 500 feet of any of my 3 locations, Olivia would have me arrested for criminal trespassing. My sister had locked me out of my own life and mailed me a threat of jail time if I tried to return. She felt invincible. She believed the paperwork she filed shielded her from any consequence. She thought she possessed the high ground because my parents stood behind her, offering their blind support to the daughter they always preferred. I read the cease and desist order twice. I did not throw the phone. I did not scream. I looked at the printer sliding the final page of federal evidence into the tray. Olivia wanted to play with legal threats. She wanted to wield the law like a weapon against the sister who paid her debts. David handed me a thick manila envelope containing the printed logs. "You have the matches," he said. "You have the fire. Where are you taking this?" I placed the envelope in my leather bag. "I am not striking the match yet," I said. "They still think I am the victim. Let them get comfortable." I walked out of the warehouse into the November wind. I had the weapon I needed to destroy Marcus and his career. I had the proof to dismantle Olivia's fraud. But dropping the evidence now would only stop the bleeding. It would not teach them the lesson they needed to learn. I drove back toward the city. The radio remained off. My mind organized the timeline. Olivia had the company. She had the bank accounts. She had the title of Chief Executive Officer. What she lacked was the capability to actually run a commercial baking operation. Taking the crown is easy. Keeping the empire from burning down requires actual work. By the time I parked my vehicle in my apartment garage, another notification appeared on my screen. This one was from a local business journalist. The media campaign had begun. Olivia was not just stealing my assets. She was preparing to destroy my reputation to justify her theft. The next phase of her attack was launching, and she had no idea she was loading her own trap. The notification on my screen was a Google alert. I set it up 5 years ago to track mentions of the bakery. The headline from the Chicago Business Journal loaded in sharp black text. Family steps in to save Chloe's crust amid founder's health crisis. I sat at my kitchen island and read the article. Olivia had given an exclusive interview. She posed for the header photograph, standing behind the pastry case at my downtown location. She wore a pristine white chef's coat, a garment she had never earned, bearing a freshly embroidered logo. The quotes were surgical. Running a tri-state operation took a severe toll on my sister's mental well-being, Olivia told the reporter. She experienced a prolonged period of exhaustion and cognitive burnout. As a family, we had to make the difficult decision to step in and assume operational control before the business she loves collapsed under her stress. They did not mention the forged documents. They did not mention the late-night server hijack. They painted a portrait of a fragile blue-collar baker who crumbled under the pressure of corporate scaling, graciously rescued by her educated, MBA-holding older sister. It was the exact narrative my parents had secretly wanted to believe for years, that a baker could never truly be a CEO without the smart sister stepping in. I opened Facebook. Olivia had shared the article to her public page. The caption read, "Sometimes leadership means making the hard choices to protect the people you love. Honored to take the helm and guide Chloe's crust into its next chapter." Below the post, the comments stacked up. The top response belonged to my mother. "We are so proud of you, Olivia. Stepping up to fix this mess and saving your sister's legacy shows what true family loyalty looks like." My father replied to her comment with a single prayer hands emoji. They were establishing a public narrative. If I went to the authorities now without an ironclad federal case, I would look exactly like the unstable, paranoid woman Olivia described in the press. Any claim of theft would be dismissed as a delusion, born of the very breakdown she had just fed to a local journalist. It was a preemptive strike against my credibility. I took a screenshot of the article. I captured the Facebook post, expanding the comment section to ensure my mother's words were visible. I dragged the image files into an encrypted folder on my desktop, labeled Exhibits. 2 weeks passed. The locks on my stores remained unchanged. I stayed inside my apartment, watching the digital dashboard of my hijacked empire. Olivia had the title, but she lacked the fundamental understanding of what made the business profitable. She built her counterfeit empire the exact same way she baked, rushing the process, using cheap substitutes, and expecting the structure to hold. Like a rushed dough, it collapsed under its own weight. She viewed a bakery through the lens of a spreadsheet, seeing only margins and expense columns. She did not understand the chemistry of the product. The Yelp notifications began pinging my phone on a Thursday. For 7 years, the flagship location held a steady 4.8-star rating. Our signature item, the almond croissant, was the anchor of our revenue. Proper lamination requires European butter with an 82% fat content. It is expensive, temperamental, and reacts poorly to temperature fluctuations. It is also the only reason the pastry shatters into 100 crisp flakes when you bite into it. The newest review carried a single star. What happened to the croissants? Ordered a half dozen for a morning meeting. They taste like artificial butter flavoring and have the texture of damp cardboard. Undercooked in the middle, save your money. Another followed 3 hours later. Did ownership change? The sourdough loaves are dense and pale. The crust used to crackle, now it tastes like a grocery store roll, disappointing. I did not need to see the kitchen to know what Olivia had done. She looked at the procurement ledger, saw the monthly invoice for imported French butter, and eliminated it to cut overhead. She substituted it with industrial margarine or a cheap oil blend. She likely fired the overnight artisan bread mixer to save on elevated third-shift wages, replacing the slow fermentation process with commercial yeast accelerators. She was maximizing short-term profit by cannibalizing the brand's reputation. I picked up my phone and dialed Vincent. Vincent owned Prairie Wheat Mills, a regional supplier that provided my unbleached organic flour. We had done business for 8 years. I attended his daughter's wedding. I expected him to answer on the first ring. It went to voicemail. I called again. On the fourth ring, the line clicked open. "Chloe," Vincent said. His voice was hushed, lacking its usual boom. He sounded like he was standing in a hallway. "Vincent, I need a favor," I said. "I need you to pull the delivery manifest for the last 2 weeks. I need a record of the ingredient downgrades the new management ordered." "I can't do that." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "It's just a PDF export, Vince. It takes 2 minutes. "You don't understand." A door clicked shut in the background of his audio. "Your brother-in-law sent a legal notice to my front office yesterday. Marcus drafted it on his investment firm's letterhead. It stated that if Prairie Wheat Mills provides any documentation, proprietary supply data, or even communicates business matters with unauthorized personnel, specifically naming you, they will immediately terminate our vendor contract and pursue damages for breach of confidentiality." My grip on the phone tightened. Marcus was leveraging the prestige of his federal banking position to intimidate local flour millers. A $40,000 monthly account represented a significant portion of Vincent's revenue. "He threatened your contract," I stated. "He didn't just threaten the contract, Chloe. Marcus knows I just took out a commercial loan to expand the milling facility. He hinted that his firm might reconsider underwriting the equipment lease if we prove to be an unreliable partner." Vincent sighed, a heavy, tired sound. "I have a payroll to meet. I can't go to war with a senior finance director over a family dispute. I'm sorry." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. A family dispute. That was the shield they hid behind. As long as the world viewed this as a squabble between sisters, Marcus could operate with impunity. He was constructing a blockade, cutting off my access to allies, suppliers, and my own reputation. He and Olivia believed they had starved me of resources and isolated me into submission. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new subfolder. I typed out a summary of the conversation with Vincent, noting the exact time, the mention of the corporate letterhead, and the threat involving the equipment lease. I dropped it into the encrypted drive alongside the server logs David had provided and the cease and desist order. Let them serve cheap margarine. Let them post smiling photos on social media. Let my parents applaud their counterfeit success. Every lie they told, every supplier they threatened, every dollar they squeezed out of the product quality left a paper trail. I did not interrupt their victory lap. I archived it. But a business cannot survive on substituted ingredients and PR spin alone, especially not when the operators have a lifestyle to fund. The missing $150,000 from the operating account was just the beginning of their cash flow problem. They were bleeding capital, and the margins from cheap butter would not cover the deficit. They needed a massive injection of cash. The next morning, an envelope arrived in my mail slot. It bore the return address of the County Recorder of Deeds. I tore it open. It was an automated property alert I had set up years ago when I first considered buying commercial real estate. The document inside was a copy of a newly registered commercial lien. Olivia had not just stolen the bakery. She had drained the company's existing $1 million commercial line of credit and successfully petitioned the bank to double it. And the new collateral listed on the second page sent a shockwave of cold clarity straight down my spine. I stood in my kitchen, holding the envelope from the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. I had set up the automated property alert 7 years ago to notify me whenever a lien or title change occurred against any parcel associated with my company. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out a stack of stapled pages. The top sheet bore the unmistakable, bold heading of a commercial real estate deed of trust. I spread the pages across my kitchen island. Olivia had hijacked the immaculate credit history I built over a decade to max out the corporate credit line. But banks do not arbitrarily double a credit limit to $2 million for a new managing member with a history of 3 bankrupt startups. Her personal credit score was a wasteland. To secure that expansion, she needed to provide an ironclad safety net, a new asset. I flipped to the 3rd page, Schedule A, the collateral description. There were 2 items listed. The first was the commercial property holding my flagship bakery, the building I had purchased outright 3 years ago. The second item stopped my breath. It was a residential parcel, Block 4, Lot 12. A single-family home located in Oak Park. I knew the address without looking at the parcel boundaries. I grew up in that house. It was a 3-bedroom brick colonial where my parents had lived for 35 years. I traced the signatures at the bottom of page 4. Rendered in blue ink, notarized and stamped, were the names of my mother and father. They had signed a cross-collateralization agreement. They had pledged the roof over their own heads, their retirement safety net, to guarantee a loan for a daughter who had never successfully run a lemonade stand. Why did Olivia need $2 million right now? The bakeries generated healthy revenue, but that revenue took time to compound. She needed immediate liquidity. I picked up my phone and dialed David. He answered on the second ring, the sound of a mechanical keyboard clacking in the background. I found out where the money went, I said. Not the loan, the initial $150,000 she wired out of my operating account. The keyboard went silent. Tell me. I read him the routing numbers from the bank ledger. You said the IP address mapped back to Marcus's investment bank. The receiving account for the wire transfer belongs to a clearinghouse used by that same firm. Marcus manages high-yield wealth portfolios. The tech sector took a sharp downturn the week before Olivia forged my signature. David caught the thread immediately. He was trading on margin. Exactly, I said. Marcus leveraged his personal portfolio. When the market dipped, his broker issued a margin call. He needed cash immediately to cover the deficit. If he failed to deposit the funds, his positions would be liquidated, exposing his insolvency to his own firm. He would lose his licenses. He would lose his career. Olivia did not steal my company because she wanted to be a baker. She did not orchestrate a hostile takeover because she had a grand vision for scaling the brand. She stole it because her husband was drowning in bad debt and my operating account was the closest life raft. They drained my payroll funds to save Marcus from financial ruin. But stealing the cash created an immediate operational crisis. The bakery suppliers demanded payment. The employees expected their checks. The commercial ovens required maintenance. To fix the crisis they created, Olivia drained my existing corporate line of credit. But that was not enough to keep the operation running while Marcus covered his tracks. She needed the bank to double the limit. To secure that expansion, she needed fresh collateral. To get the collateral, she went to the 2 people who had never told her no. My parents. I looked down at their signatures again, the blue ink looking like venom. A wave of nausea hit me, and I braced myself against the freezing bricks of the bakery exterior until it passed. My father had spent his entire life working middle management at a logistics firm. He bragged at every family gathering about owning his home free and clear. Now he had quietly handed the deed to a bank to fund Olivia's illusion. They truly believed she was a visionary. They believed she would multiply the investment. They had staked their survival on a woman who was currently substituting premium European butter with industrial vegetable oil. My phone buzzed against the marble counter. A text message from my mother illuminated the screen. It was Sunday afternoon. The message read, "We are having a family dinner tonight to celebrate Olivia's new expansion strategy. You should come. It is time to drop this childish grudge and support your sister." I read the text twice. A celebration. They were roasting a chicken and pouring wine to toast a $2 million debt they had just tethered to their own necks. I picked up my keys, put on my coat, and drove toward Oak Park. I did not go to eat. I did not go to argue. I needed to see them. I needed to look at their faces and understand how deep the delusion went. I parked 2 houses down from my childhood home. The street was lined with familiar oak trees, their branches stripped bare by the winter wind. I walked slowly up the driveway, keeping my footsteps quiet on the frost-covered concrete. Through the large front bay window, the living room was clearly visible. The lamps cast a warm golden light across the space. Marcus stood near the brick fireplace. He held a crystal glass of bourbon, laughing expansively at something my father said. He looked relaxed, wearing a cashmere sweater, exuding the easy confidence of a man who had just narrowly escaped disaster. Olivia sat on the sofa, her legs tucked underneath her, holding a glass of wine. She looked triumphant. My mother emerged from the kitchen carrying a silver platter of food, her face glowing with pride as she set it on the dining table. I stood on the sidewalk in the freezing air and watched the pantomime unfold, a single hot tear blurring the golden light of the living room window before it froze on my cheek. Marcus was drinking top-shelf liquor in a house he had essentially mortgaged. Olivia was accepting adulation for a business she was actively driving into the ground. My parents were smiling, entirely unaware that a commercial bank now held the keys to their front door. The urge to march up those steps, kick open the front door, and wrap my hands around my father's collar flared in my chest. I wanted to scream the truth at them. I wanted to shatter their happy illusion just like they shattered my life. It would be loud. It would be emotionally satisfying for exactly 5 minutes. But it would be a mistake. Confronting them now would only give them a chance to invent a new lie. It would give Marcus time to shift his remaining assets into offshore accounts. It would give Olivia an opportunity to play the victim and twist the narrative, claiming the loan was necessary because I had left the business in poor condition. The law of gravity does not negotiate with arrogance. If you jump off a roof, you fall. They had jumped. My only job was to let gravity do its work. I turned around and walked back to my vehicle. The cold bit into my skin, but my mind felt like a sterile, brightly lit room. I sat behind the wheel, started the engine, and drafted a brief text to David. I need you to monitor the debt service schedule on a new commercial loan tied to the LLC. Send me an alert the second they miss a payment. I hit send. My parents had tied themselves to a sinking ship. They had braided the rope, secured the knots, and handed the anchor directly to my sister. The fuse was lit, and the fire was moving straight toward the powder keg. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving them to their celebration. The expanded $2 million credit line bought Olivia time, but it did not buy her operational competence. Debt requires servicing. A monthly payment on a loan of that size drains cash flow faster than a single storefront can replenish it. Olivia understood spreadsheets. She knew she needed an immediate, exponential increase in revenue to keep the banks quiet and to keep Marcus from defaulting on his hidden obligations. She could not achieve that by selling individual pastries over a glass counter. She needed a corporate buyer. I received a text message from a regional supply coordinator I'd worked with for years. The message contained a single screenshot of a vendor calendar. Olivia had secured a pitch meeting with the East Coast Procurement Board for Whole Foods Market. She was negotiating a $3 million annual contract to supply packaged artisan baked goods to 50 premium grocery locations. It was a bold move. It was also an impossible one. Scaling a bakery operation is not a matter of simply multiplying ingredients on a calculator. You cannot take a recipe for 40 loaves of sourdough, multiply the flour and water by 100, and expect the same result. Commercial baking is applied chemistry. When you increase the volume of dough to an industrial scale, the ambient room temperature, the friction from the mechanical mixers, and the resting humidity all change the fermentation rate. Over 10 years, I developed proprietary hydration algorithms to adjust my recipes based on the daily atmospheric pressure inside the kitchen. Those formulas were the true value of my company. They ensured a croissant baked in Chicago tasted identical to one baked in a satellite location. And all of those algorithms were locked inside a heavily encrypted solid-state drive sitting on my apartment desk. Olivia had the ovens. She had the physical buildings. She did not have the brain of the operation. Without my digital framework, her kitchen staff was flying blind. Basic retail recipes, the results were predictable. The dough lacked structure. The laminated pastries leaked butter onto the baking sheets. The bread came out dense and flavorless. Whole Foods does not sign $3 million vendor agreements based on a PowerPoint presentation. They require a comprehensive tasting event. Their executives inspect the crumb structure, test the shelf life, and verify the consistency of the product. Olivia was staring down a deadline, and her product was failing. She needed my core formulas, and she knew she could not break my digital encryption. So she went analog. It happened on a Tuesday night, 4 days before her scheduled presentation. I was sitting in my living room, reviewing the financial ledgers David had extracted. My phone illuminated. A motion sensor alert flashed across the screen. When Olivia drafted her cease and desist order, barring me from my own properties, she relied on the building's primary security system. She deactivated my keycards and changed the master alarm codes. She did not know I had installed a secondary, hardwired camera inside my private office at the flagship location. It operated on an independent cellular network. I tapped the notification. The live feed loaded. The office was dark, illuminated only by the ambient streetlights filtering through the blinds. The door handle rattled. A second later, the heavy wooden door splintered inward. Olivia stepped into the room. She was wearing a tailored trench coat, holding a heavy steel pry bar in her right hand. I watched my older sister, a woman with a master's degree in business administration, walk across my office like a common burglar. She did not look for digital files. She went straight for my vintage oak desk. She jammed the flat edge of the pry bar into the seam of the bottom drawer and threw her body weight against the handle. The brass lock snapped. The wood fractured. She pulled the drawer open and threw files onto the floor. She was looking for my personal notebooks. Bakers keep physical journals. We write down experimental hydration ratios, wild yeast behaviors, and flavor profiles that are not yet ready for production. I kept a black leather-bound journal in that drawer. It contained 3 years of unfinished concepts, recipes that looked brilliant on paper but required highly specific temperature controls to execute. Olivia found the black journal. She flipped through the pages, her face illuminated by the beam of a small flashlight. She shoved the book into her coat pocket, stepped over the ruined files, and walked out of the office. I did not call the police to report a break-in. A broken desk drawer was a misdemeanor property crime. I was building a federal indictment. I exported the video file, logged the exact timestamp, and dropped it into my encrypted storage drive. She had the notebook. She believed she had the key to the Whole Foods contract. But Olivia lacked the fundamental knowledge to understand what she had stolen. The recipes in that journal were incomplete. They were traps for an amateur. Her arrogance did not stop at physical theft. 2 days later, David sent me a link to the United States Patent and Trademark Office public registry. Olivia had filed expedited intellectual property claims. She took the names of my signature products, attached the experimental formulas she had stolen from my desk, and registered them under a newly formed subsidiary LLC. She listed herself as the sole creator and developer. She was taking my raw ideas and branding them as her own corporate assets. She was constructing a counterfeit empire on a foundation of stolen paperwork and broken oak. The social media campaign accelerated. My parents became her unofficial public relations team. My father posted updates on his LinkedIn profile praising his eldest daughter's visionary leadership. My mother sent daily messages to our extended family group chat. She bragged about the upcoming corporate merger. She talked about the Ritz-Carlton. Olivia had booked a private conference room at the Ritz-Carlton downtown to host the Whole Foods executive board. It was meant to be a lavish display of corporate strength, a catered event where she would present the stolen recipes, shake hands with the regional buyers, and sign the preliminary service agreement. My parents treated it like a coronation. On Thursday morning, my apartment buzzer rang. The mail carrier dropped a parcel in my designated slot. I walked down to the lobby and retrieved it. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope. The return address bore the embossed logo of my own bakery. I carried it upstairs and sliced it open with a kitchen knife. Inside was a formal VIP guest pass printed on thick cardstock. The gold lettering invited the recipient to an exclusive tasting and partnership gala at the Ritz-Carlton. Olivia was inviting me to watch her sell my company. Tucked behind the formal invitation was a yellow sticky note. The handwriting belonged to my mother. The ink pressed deep into the paper, written with aggressive, sharp strokes. I read the words standing alone in my kitchen. Come see your sister make history. Stop living in the past and learn to accept the truth. I traced the edge of the cardstock with my thumb. They wanted an audience. They wanted me to sit in a velvet chair and watch them raise glasses of champagne to celebrate a transaction funded by fraud and secured by theft. They wanted my submission to validate their narrative. I peeled the sticky note off the invitation. I folded it perfectly in half, walked into my home office, and placed it inside the manila folder containing the IP logs, the wire transfer records, and the deed of trust they had unknowingly signed away. History was going to be recorded in that hotel. My mother was right about that. But the truth they were about to accept would not come in the form of a corporate contract. I picked up my phone and dialed David. It was time to introduce the federal government to my sister's new business model. 48 hours before the scheduled tasting event, David steered his sedan through the sleet-slicked streets of downtown Chicago. We parked 3 blocks from the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse. The wind coming off Lake Michigan felt like shattered glass against my face. I carried a thick binder secured with a red spine. It contained every digital fingerprint, every bank ledger, and every forged signature we had collected over the past month. We did not walk to a local precinct. We walked through the revolving doors of the federal building, placed our phones in the gray plastic trays of the security checkpoint, and stepped into the metal detectors. I watched the security guard run the wand over David's coat. My pulse maintained a steady, even rhythm. The panic had burned off weeks ago, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. We took the elevator to the floor housing the white-collar crime division. A receptionist directed us to a sterile room with cinder-block walls painted a pale institutional blue. A single rectangular table occupied the center of the space. Special Agent Thomas Harrison entered a few minutes later. He wore a gray suit that looked inexpensive but pressed and carried a blank legal pad. He sat across from us, uncapped a ballpoint pen, and offered a polite, practiced smile. It was the expression of a man who spent his days listening to business partners complain about stolen client lists and broken contracts. He expected a civil dispute. He expected me to cry about a family betrayal. I did not shed a single tear. I placed the red spine binder flat on the table and pushed it across the laminated surface. My sister submitted a forged operating agreement to the state registry to illegally transfer ownership of my commercial bakery. I stated, my voice bouncing off the hard walls. She then utilized federal banking infrastructure to wire $150,000 out of my corporate operating account into a private wealth management clearinghouse. Agent Harrison stopped writing. He looked at the closed binder, then up at me. The polite smile vanished. The word federal changes the temperature in a room. David leaned forward and opened the cover. He tapped the first printed spreadsheet. The digital signature was executed at 2 in the morning, David explained. The internet protocol address is static. It resolves to a premium residential connection in Lake Forest. But the device fingerprint carries a virtual private network handshake exclusive to a Tier 1 investment bank. Harrison pulled the page closer. His eyes scanned the strings of red code. Who works at the investment bank? He asked. Marcus, I replied, my brother-in-law. He is a senior director of wealth management at that firm. He used bank-issued hardware operating on a secured financial network to facilitate the theft of a commercial enterprise. I turned to the second tab in the binder. I laid out the wire transfer receipts, the routing numbers, and the destination accounts. I explained the timeline of the tech sector market drop. I detailed the margin call Marcus faced and how he drained my payroll funds to cover his personal trading deficit. Harrison traced the routing numbers with the tip of his pen. He was no longer looking at a family argument. He was looking at identity theft, wire fraud, and severe ethical violations under the Securities and Exchange Commission. A senior finance director embezzling corporate funds to cover personal market losses was a career-ending felony. I turned to the final section of the binder. I produced the commercial deed of trust. I showed him how my sister drained my corporate line of credit and fraudulently expanded it to $2 million using my stolen company as the primary applicant. I pointed to the cross-collateralization clause bearing my parents' notarized signatures, pledging their residential home against my sister's fraudulent debt. She lacks the operational revenue to service this loan, I told him. She is currently negotiating a multi-million-dollar vendor contract with a national grocery chain to acquire the necessary cash flow. She plans to present my stolen proprietary recipes to their executive board this Thursday evening at the Ritz-Carlton. If she signs that contract, she defrauds a national retailer. Agent Harrison did not ask about my feelings. He did not ask why my family would do this. He recognized the immediate mechanical threat of the situation. Marcus possessed the financial literacy to move capital across international borders in seconds. If Marcus suspected an active federal probe, the remaining funds would vanish into offshore holding companies before the morning ended, leaving the domestic accounts empty and the creditors circling my stolen company. Harrison stood up, taking the binder with him. "Stay here," he ordered. He walked out of the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. David and I sat in silence. The ventilation system hummed a low, steady drone. I looked at the bare walls and thought about my mother writing that sticky note, inviting me to watch Olivia make history. I thought about my father handing over the deed to his house to fund a lie. They wanted me to accept the truth. I was currently ensuring the truth would be delivered to them with a federal seal. Agent Harrison closed the binder. "We are opening a formal criminal probe," he said, his voice flat. "But federal investigations and grand jury subpoenas take time. If you want to stop them from draining those accounts today, you need a civil judge." I looked at David. He was already pulling a secondary file from his briefcase. "I filed an emergency civil injunction with the Chancery Court this morning," David said. "A temporary restraining order on all corporate assets. The judge signed it an hour ago." While the FBI began building their wire fraud case in the background, David's civil injunction acted as an immediate guillotine. By Wednesday afternoon, the court order navigated its way through the interbank communication network. Compliance officers at Chase and the Wealth Management Clearinghouse received the legal directives from our process servers. The digital locks snapped shut. Olivia could swipe her platinum card to buy coffee, but any attempt to transfer funds, withdraw capital, or leverage the commercial credit lines would trigger a hard decline. Marcus could stare at his trading terminals, but his access to the portfolio margins was dead. The oxygen supply to their counterfeit empire had been severed, and they remained entirely unaware, busy preparing for their grand corporate coronation. Thursday arrived. The sky over Chicago was the color of bruised iron. The tasting gala at the Ritz-Carlton was scheduled for 7 in the evening. At 4 o'clock, I stood in my bedroom. My closet held dozens of white chef coats, flour-dusted jeans, and practical slip-resistant shoes. The uniform of a woman who woke up before dawn, kept her head down, and built a business with her bare hands. The uniform of a woman who absorbed her family's insults because keeping the peace felt easier than starting a war. I bypassed the coats. I reached into the back of the closet and unzipped a black garment bag. I pulled out a tailored suit. The fabric was sharp, structured, unforgiving. I put it on. I fastened the buttons of the crisp white shirt underneath. I stood in front of the full-length mirror. The person looking back did not resemble a baker. She did not resemble the quiet sister who cleaned up everyone else's messes. She looked like a blade. I walked to my desk and picked up a silver USB drive. It did not contain the hydration ratios for sourdough or the lamination schedule for French butter. David had helped me compile the drive the night before. It held high-resolution images of the server logs, the forged signature metadata, and the federal wire transfer receipts. I slipped the metal drive into my jacket pocket. It felt heavy against my ribs. Olivia expected me to walk into that ballroom and surrender. She expected me to sit in a velvet chair, watch her serve dense, inferior pastries to corporate executives, and applaud her genius. My parents expected me to swallow my pride and accept my new role as a spectator in my own life. They had constructed a beautiful, expensive stage to display their victory. I checked my watch. The hands clicked toward 5. It was time to go. Tonight, I would step into that hotel not as a defeated sibling, but as the architect of their ruin. The corridor on the second floor of the Ritz-Carlton was lined with thick crimson carpet that absorbed the sound of my footsteps. Brass wall sconces cast a warm, expensive glow against the silk-paneled walls. I walked past a pair of catering attendants rolling a silver cart toward the service elevators. The air carried the faint, buttery scent of baked sugar. They were serving the tasting menu. Olivia was currently feeding national grocery buyers inferior pastries manufactured with cheap oil blends, hoping her corporate jargon would mask the degraded crumb structure of the croissants. I stopped outside the heavy mahogany double doors of the VIP conference suite. Through the narrow glass viewing pane, the entire hierarchy of my hijacked life was arranged like a stage play. Olivia stood at the head of a polished boardroom table. She wore an emerald green designer dress, the silk catching the light as she gestured toward the 100-inch projection screen behind her. She looked polished, confident, and entirely out of her depth. Along the left flank of the table sat 5 executives. They wore tailored charcoal and navy suits, their expressions neutral, legal pads open in front of them. Along the right flank sat my family. Marcus leaned back in a leather chair, legs crossed at the ankle, swirling a glass of sparkling water. He wore his finest suit, projecting the aura of a man who orchestrated success. My mother and father sat next to him. My mother beamed, her hands clasped under her chin in an attitude of reverent pride. My father nodded along to the cadence of Olivia's voice, validating the daughter he had chosen to back with his own home. I pushed the brass handles down. The heavy doors swung open. The sudden rush of hallway air disrupted the temperature in the room. Olivia stopped speaking mid-sentence. Her hand, holding a digital slide clicker, froze in the air. The 5 executives turned their heads in unison. My parents swiveled in their chairs. For 2 seconds, the only sound in the conference suite was the low hum of the projector fan. The color drained from Olivia's face, leaving a pale, chalky contrast against the dark green fabric of her dress. Her eyes darted from me to the executives and back again. She gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning sharp and white. "Security!" she said, her voice high, thin, and entirely devoid of the confident corporate timbre she had been projecting a moment before. "Get her out of here. She is a disgruntled former employee." I did not pause. I did not look at my parents or the man who had facilitated the takeover of my company. I kept my eyes locked on the presentation console, resting on a small podium near the projector. I walked past the row of executives, my black suit cutting a sharp line through the opulent room. A hotel audiovisual technician stood near the wall, shifting his weight, unsure whether to intervene. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the silver USB drive. Olivia lunged toward the podium. "Do not touch that equipment!" I stepped directly into her path, utilizing my shoulder to block her advance. I did not push her, but I held my ground like concrete. She hit my shoulder and stumbled backward, her designer heels sinking unsteadily into the plush carpet. Before she could regain her balance, I inserted the silver drive into the primary port of the laptop. I executed 3 quick keystrokes, bypassing her presentation software and overriding the display output. The 100-inch screen behind her flickered. The colorful bar graph illustrating fabricated quarterly revenue vanished. In its place, a high-contrast document appeared, magnified to dominate the entire front wall of the room. It was a raw server log. Rows of red binary code, precise timestamps, and a highlighted static access address sat adjacent to the metadata of an authenticated digital signature packet. I turned my back to my sister and faced the 5 executives. They were staring at the wall, their brows furrowing as their minds processed the unexpected shift in data. "My name is Chloe," I stated. My voice was level, echoing off the wood-paneled walls with the cold precision of a falling blade. I am the legal founder and sole owner of the bakery chain you are currently evaluating. What you are sitting at this table negotiating is a vendor contract built entirely on misappropriated assets and unauthorized financial conduct. The lead executive, a woman with silver hair pulled into a tight knot, frowned and lowered her pen. It tapped against the mahogany surface. Olivia found her voice, shrill and frantic. She is lying. She had a mental breakdown. Turn that screen off right now. I did not raise my volume to compete with her panic. I simply pointed a single finger at the massive projection. This is the secure server data extracted from a dual authentication firewall. It captures the exact moment Olivia falsified my signature on an unauthorized operating agreement at 2:14 in the morning. The access point traces directly to a residential property in Lake Forest. I pressed the right arrow key on the laptop. The slide transitioned. The screen now displayed a banking ledger. A thick red box isolated a specific sequence of routing numbers and a pending balance. And this, I continued, holding the gaze of the lead executive, is an unauthorized transfer record. $150,000 routed from my commercial operating account into a private clearinghouse. The shift in the room was instantaneous and mechanical. Corporate buyers do not ask for emotional context. They react to liability. The lead executive closed her leather portfolio. The heavy cover snapped shut. The 4 men seated beside her followed the cue in perfect synchronization. They slid their documents into their briefcases, capped their pens, and pushed their chairs back from the table. The tasting plates sitting in front of them were pushed aside. The deal was dead. Marcus understood the gravity of the screen before anyone else in my family did. He stared at the numbers projected on the wall. The smug, relaxed posture dissolved. The blood abandoned his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. A visible tremor started in his left hand. He recognized the clearinghouse account. He realized the executives in the room were no longer looking at a bakery presentation. They were witnessing evidence of misconduct executed over a secured financial network. His professional career, his licenses, his entire curated existence were currently burning to ash on a hotel projector screen. He kicked his chair back. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. He vaulted across the space between the front row and the podium, reaching wildly for the laptop, intending to rip the USB drive from the port. I did not retreat. I planted my feet and dropped my voice to a dangerous low register. Don't touch that, Marcus. He froze. His hand hovered 6 inches from the keyboard, his fingers twitching in the air. He looked at me, his eyes wide and frantic, stripped of every layer of superiority he had ever aimed at me across the Thanksgiving table. You just left your digital fingerprint on a serious violation, I said, staring directly into his panic. Pulling that drive out now will not erase the data from the regulatory servers. It will only add to the formal inquiry. He recoiled as if the laptop had caught fire. He stumbled back, bumping into the edge of the mahogany table, his chest heaving. My father stood up. His face was a mask of dark mottled red, the veins in his neck strained against his shirt collar. He pointed a trembling finger at me. Chloe, what the hell are you doing? Turn that off. You are ruining your sister's deal. I looked at the man who had quietly signed away the deed to his own house to fund this charade. I looked at the mother who sat beside him, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes darting between the frozen executives and the red numbers on the wall. She doesn't have a deal, Dad, I replied, my tone entirely void of sympathy. She has a major fallout. Olivia lunged toward the laptop, her hands grasping for the silver drive protruding from the port. She missed, her fingers slapping uselessly against the plastic casing. She spun back toward the 5 buyers, her eyes wide, her voice climbing to a shrill, frantic pitch. Please, you have to ignore her, she pleaded, her palms raised toward the buyers. My sister has been unwell. She has a documented history of mental instability. She is fabricating this entire presentation to sabotage a legitimate business transaction. The lead executive did not blink. She did not offer a polite smile or a word of understanding. Corporate procurement boards do not navigate family drama. They assess risk. And the risk projected in 10-foot red code on the wall behind Olivia was radioactive. The executive picked up her leather portfolio. The heavy magnetic clasp snapped shut. It was the loudest sound in the room, a sharp, mechanical finality. Her 4 colleagues followed the cue in perfect synchronization, sliding their legal pads into their briefcases and rising from their chairs. They did not look at Olivia. They did not look at me. They simply bypassed the table of untouched pastry samples and walked toward the exit. The $3 million contract, the life raft Olivia needed, evaporated into the hallway air. Olivia watched them leave, her mouth open, the emerald silk of her designer dress suddenly looking like a costume she had stolen for a school play. Before the heavy mahogany doors could swing shut behind the departing executives, a hand caught the brass handle. The doors pushed open again. 3 men walked into the suite, plain suits, muted gray. They did not carry weapons. They did not raise their voices. They moved with the quiet, suffocating authority of a formal oversight investigation. David stepped into the room alongside a uniformed process server and a senior official. The process server stepped to the front, holding 2 thick manila envelopes. He bypassed the empty executive chairs and stopped a few feet from the podium.
Olivia Townsend and Marcus Sterling,
the process server stated, his voice ringing out in the silent room.
You are being served.
He extended one envelope toward Olivia. She did not take it. He let the envelope drop onto the mahogany table. He handed the second envelope to Marcus, pressing it directly against the man's chest. Those are emergency civil injunctions, David said, stepping forward. Effective yesterday afternoon, all corporate, personal, and affiliated accounts bearing your managing signatures have been frozen by a judge. This includes all lines of credit, margin accounts, and the commercial operating funds. The senior official moved past David, his badge flashing under the chandelier light. He looked directly at Marcus. And we're here to secure your electronic devices, pending a formal regulatory inquiry for financial misconduct. The agents did not produce handcuffs. The confiscation of capital is far more paralyzing than iron cuffs. My father broke the silence. He pushed himself out of his chair, his face a dark mottled crimson. The veins in his neck strained against the collar of his dress shirt. He pointed a trembling finger across the room, bypassing the officials, aiming directly at me.
Chloe, what are you doing?
His voice boomed, carrying the heavy, demanding tone he had used to govern our household for 3 decades.
You called the authorities on your own flesh and blood? You are killing this family.
I stepped away from the podium. I walked toward the front row, closing the distance until I stood 3 feet from the man who had always viewed my labor as a convenient resource for his favorite child. I reached into the inner pocket of my black blazer and withdrew a folded document. I did not raise my voice to match his. I dropped the stapled pages onto the table, right next to the injunction. No, Dad, I replied, the words sharp and cold. You did this to yourself. He stared at the paper, then back at me, his brow furrowed in angry confusion. That is a copy of a commercial deed of trust, I explained, keeping my tone surgical. Olivia maxed out my corporate line of credit and petitioned the bank to double the limit to $2 million. But her personal record is a wasteland. The underwriters required fresh collateral to approve an expansion of that magnitude. I reached out and flipped the document to the 3rd page, tapping the signature line at the bottom of the schedule of assets. Look at the ink, Dad, I said. You and Mom signed a cross-collateralization agreement. You pledged your single-family home in Oak Park to guarantee her unauthorized debt. The red anger drained from my father's face, replaced instantly by the hollow, ashen gray of a man realizing he had stepped off a cliff in the dark. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his reading glasses with a shaky hand, and leaned over the table. He stared at his own signature. He stared at the address of the house he had spent 35 years paying off. The bank holding that commercial loan just received the same freeze order your son-in-law is holding, I continued, letting the reality settle over him like concrete. Without access to the operating accounts, Olivia cannot service the debt. She will default on the first payment. The commercial bank will not negotiate with the borrower under formal investigation for misconduct. They will execute the lien. Your house will be seized within 30 days. A sound escaped my mother's throat. It was a thin, high-pitched wheeze, the sound of a lung failing to draw air. She fell back into her padded chair, both hands clutching the fabric over her chest. The woman who had mailed me an invitation to watch her eldest daughter make history was gone. She looked at the woman at the podium. "Olivia," my mother gasped, her voice trembling. "Tell her she is lying. Tell me the house is safe." Olivia did not look at our mother. Her hands were shaking so severely that she dropped the slide clicker. It clattered against the wood floor. She fumbled with her designer clutch, pulling out her smartphone. Her thumb swiped frantically across the glass, tapping the icon for her primary banking application. The screen illuminated her pale face. I watched her eyes track the text loading on the display. Her mouth parted. The phone slipped from her fingers, landing on the table with a dull thud. The screen remained bright, displaying a stark red banner across the top interface. Access denied. Account frozen. Near the wall, Marcus slowly backed away from the group. He retreated until his shoulder blades hit the silk-paneled wall. He understood the mechanism of the destruction far better than my parents did. He knew the internal compliance protocols. A freeze order running parallel to an active investigation meant his professional license was already suspended. By tomorrow morning, the compliance officers at his firm would lock him out of his terminals and terminate his employment. He had risked his entire career, his reputation, and his freedom, and the resulting paper trail had just materialized in the hands of the authorities. His legs gave out. The sharp, tailored lines of his suit crumpled as he slid down the wall, coming to a rest on the plush, crimson carpet. He pulled his knees to his chest and buried his face in his hands. He did not say a word. The architect of the hostile takeover had been reduced to a silent, hollow shell. The process server stepped back, leaving the papers on the table. The officials instructed their team to begin securing the electronics. The civil court had delivered the financial decree. The formal proceedings would follow once the grand jury processed the data on the silver drive I had handed over. I stood in the center of the VIP suite. The room felt entirely different now. The opulent chandeliers, the mahogany table, the lingering scent of baked sugar. It all felt like the scattered debris of a collapsed theater set. My father was staring blankly at the deed of trust. My mother was weeping into her hands, the sound echoing off the high ceiling. Olivia stood frozen behind the podium, trapped in the harsh glow of the projector displaying the exact timestamp of her actions. I did not wait for apologies. Apologies, a currency used by people who plan to ask for another favor. I picked up my phone from the podium, turned my back on the ruins of their counterfeit empire, and walked out the double doors, leaving them to navigate the wreckage they had built themselves. The combination of the civil freeze and the official probe operated like a vacuum, pulling the oxygen out of their lives within 72 hours. Marcus did not wait for the dust to settle. Men who manage high-yield portfolios understand risk mitigation. When a ship takes on water, they do not grab a bucket. They cut the anchor. 5 days after the Ritz-Carlton presentation, a process server approached Olivia outside a store. He handed her a thick manila envelope. It contained expedited divorce filings. Marcus cited irreconcilable differences, but the attached addendums painted a clear legal strategy. He was petitioning to sever his personal assets from her pending liabilities, legally positioning himself as an unwitting victim of his wife's schemes. Unauthorized agreement. He threw the woman he married directly into the path of the investigation to save his own license. It did not work. Regulatory bodies do not forgive financial misconduct executed on their monitored networks. 2 days after he filed for divorce, officials walked into his investment bank. They escorted Marcus out of the glass building in front of his colleagues, carrying his personal belongings in a cardboard box. The firm formally barred him from the industry by the end of the month. He currently works a mid-level administrative job at a warehouse, his wages garnished to pay restitution. Olivia surrendered her passport the following Tuesday. She stood before a judge in a courtroom that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. The designer emerald silk dresses were gone. replaced by a gray woolen sweater that hung loosely off her shoulders. The judge read the formal charges aloud. Because the misappropriated funds crossed regional lines through the banking network, she faced severe consequences. The representative standing next to her did not argue. With her bank accounts frozen and her husband gone, she could not afford private counsel. She now lives in a month-to-month sublet, wearing a monitoring bracelet around her ankle, waiting for a final decision that will ultimately end in a long-term secured facility. She spends her days taking the public bus to mandatory supervision meetings, avoiding eye contact with the other passengers. The gravity of the cross-collateralization clause hit my parents precisely 28 days later. Commercial lenders do not offer grace periods. When the frozen entity defaulted on the first installment of the $2 million loan, the bank executed the lien. I drove past my childhood home in Oak Park on a Tuesday afternoon. A red and white public notice was stapled to the front oak door. A generic white moving van idled in the driveway. My father carried cardboard boxes out of the house he had bragged about owning free and clear for a decade. He moved slower than I remembered. His shoulders bowed under the weight of a standard packing box. My mother stood on the dying front lawn, holding a potted flame, watching representatives change the brass locks on her front door. The irony of the moment was profound. They traded a spacious 3-bedroom colonial for a cramped second-floor apartment situated next to an elevated train line. The rumble of the transit cars rattles their cheap windows every 14 minutes. They gambled their entire foundation on a golden child who only knew how to take, and they lost the roof over their heads. They blamed me. Accountability is a bitter pill, and they preferred the taste of righteous victimhood. My phone screen lit up with a barrage of text messages over the next few weeks. The tone shifted wildly from anger to desperation.
You put your own sister in a cage. How do you sleep at night? We are living out of suitcases. Your father's back is giving out. Please, call the bank. Blood is thicker than a business, Chloe. We are your family.
I sat at my kitchen island, reading the final message. The word blood stared back at me. Family is a title, earned through mutual protection and respect. When you use that title as a shield to justify misconduct, you forfeit the privilege of the relationship. You become a liability. I tapped the contact icon on my screen. I selected my mother's number. I pressed block. I did the same for my father. I severed the digital cord. There would be no holiday dinners. There would be no awkward reconciliations. The bridge was burned, and I stood on the other side, watching the ashes drift into the river. The cleanup required 2 months of unrelenting labor. I stood in the flagship kitchen at 4 a.m, wearing my flour-dusted jeans and an apron. The space smelled of rancid commercial oil. Olivia's cost-cutting measures had left a physical residue on the equipment. I grabbed a heavy black trash bag. I walked into the walk-in refrigerator and threw out 40 pounds of cheap industrial margarine. I tossed the synthetic vanilla extracts. I scrubbed the stainless steel prep tables until the metal shone under the fluorescent lights. David and I spent weeks untangling the corporate structure. We dissolved the compromised entity and registered a new one. I hired a specialist to audit every ledger, ensuring the investigators had a pristine trail of evidence and clearing my name from the expanded $2 million debt. Once the digital and physical rot was cleared, I scheduled a meeting with the procurement board for Whole Foods Market. I did not book a suite at the Ritz-Carlton. I invited them to my downtown kitchen. I stood across from the same executive who had walked out on Olivia. I handed her a fresh almond croissant, baked that morning using 82% fat European butter. The pastry shattered perfectly upon the first bite, scattering flakes across a napkin. We signed a revised regional distribution contract an hour later. They did not invest in a glossy presentation or misappropriated ideas. They invested in the person who built the recipe from the ground up. Chloe's Crust opened its doors to the public on the first Monday in March. A line of customers stretched around the block before the sun came up. The air smelled of caramelized sugar and dark roasted coffee. I stood behind the register, ringing up orders, feeling the familiar comforting ache in my feet from standing on ceramic tile. I looked up at the corner of the ceiling. A new hardwired security camera blinked its steady red light. The access logs were encrypted, routed directly to a private server requiring biometric authentication. No one would ever change my locks again. The business was whole. My life was quiet. I had carved a sanctuary out of the wreckage, and I defended its borders with steel. No member of my bloodline is permitted to step onto the property. They are trespassers in the empire they tried to take. If your family uses the concept of loyalty to blindfold you while they take everything, you owe them nothing. Loyalty is not a suicide pact. Sometimes, protecting your future requires striking a match and letting the illusion burn. So I leave you with this question. If the people who raised you used your love to tie your hands and betray your trust, do you have the nerve to switch on the security cameras of your own life? Would you let them fall, or would you jump off the cliff to save them? Drop your answer in the comments below. Speak your truth, because the truth never has to apologize. Lesson 1. Silence is your most dangerous asset. When they lock you out, the natural human reflex is to break the glass and scream. Don't. Anger burns your energy, but silence builds your case. When your enemies are tying themselves to a $2 million anchor of unauthorized debt, do not interrupt their mistake. Your only job is to stand back, gather the data, and let gravity do its work. Lesson 2. A title is just paper. Expertise is the architecture. Olivia stood in front of a projection screen calling herself a CEO, but she couldn't forge the chemistry of a sourdough starter. You can take a registry document, but you cannot take the proprietary knowledge locked inside the founder's mind. Build skills they cannot replicate and watch them struggle inside the empire they hijacked. Lesson 3. Blood does not grant amnesty for misconduct. Family politics operate on guilt trips and loud performances. Formal rules operate on encrypted logs and transfer ledgers. If someone demands your compliance in the name of loyalty while actively draining your account, you owe them nothing. Bring the receipts, strike the match, and never apologize for protecting your own life. Before you go, if you are holding your own set of receipts while your relatives expect you to stay quiet, drop a comment below and tell me your story. Hit like and subscribe to Sweet Life Drama to join a community that fights back with facts. You never have to surrender your life to keep their peace.